You ever have one of those moments where you just freeze? Because you can't believe someone you trusted just betrayed you right to your face? Yeah, that was me, standing in the middle of our family office, holding a folder full of reports I spent all night working on, when my stepdad looked straight at me and said, "You're fired." No warning. No conversation. Just like that. The thing is, it wasn't just a job. This company, my late father's company, was the one thing that kept me connected to him. When he passed away, Mom remarried about 3 years later. She met Dan, charming, polished, the kind of man who could make anyone in a room believe he cared. At first I thought he did. He'd ask me questions about the business, tell me he was proud of how I'd kept it running through hard times, even call me his partner. Truth is, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe, finally, Mom was happy again, and that I could still belong somewhere. But looking back now, I realize that was the beginning of the setup. See, the company wasn't huge, but it was steady. My dad built it from scratch, a mid-sized logistics firm with 20 employees. After he died, I stepped in at 22. I learned every contract, every client, every system. I even drove trucks for a few months when we were short on drivers. You know that kind of pride that comes from keeping something alive because it means something? That was me. And then Dan came in. Within 6 months, he'd convinced my mom to merge some of our assets under his management umbrella. He said it was just to streamline the accounting. I didn't argue. I wanted to keep peace. Then his son Jake moved into town. Jake was 24, fresh out of some business degree program, and acted like the world owed him something. The first time I met him, he shook my hand like he was already my boss. I remember thinking, maybe he's just nervous. Spoiler, he wasn't. The next year, I noticed little changes. My stepdad started copying me on fewer emails. Clients I'd brought in were suddenly being reassigned to Jake. When I brought it up, Dan just smiled and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just helping Jake learn the ropes." But you know what? It wasn't helping, it was replacing, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. I started working harder, trying to prove my worth. Late nights, early mornings. There were days I'd be in the office alone while Mom and Dan went on weekend getaways. And yet, I didn't complain. I kept telling myself, it'll pay off. They'll see what I do. Then came that morning, the one that still burns in my memory like it just happened yesterday. Dan called me into the conference room. I thought it was about the quarterly numbers. I had them printed, color-coded, ready to present. Jake was already sitting there, spinning a pen between his fingers like he didn't have a care in the world. I smiled awkwardly, took my seat, and waited. Dan cleared his throat, looked down at the papers, then said, "We've decided to go in a new direction." I blinked. "We?" He nodded toward Jake. "Jake's been doing great work lately, and I think it's time he steps up." "You've done enough. You can take some time off." My stomach dropped. "Time off?" He leaned back, crossed his arms, and said it like he was doing me a favor. "Yeah, consider it a reset. You've been overworked. Take a few months, travel, live your life." And then, the words that broke me. "Jake will be handling operations from now on." I just stared. I couldn't even form a sentence. All the years I'd spent building that business, the late nights, the weekends, the client dinners, gone, just like that. Mom wasn't even in the room. Later, she told me she didn't want to get in the middle. That hurt more than the firing itself. You ever feel invisible in your own life? Like you gave everything to something and suddenly you're treated like a guest? That's what it felt like. I walked out of that office numb. My coworkers avoided eye contact. Jake smiled at me, that smug, rehearsed little smirk, and said, "No hard feelings, sis. It's just business, my dad's business, my life's work, my identity." Something in me snapped that day, not in anger, but in clarity. Because as I stood there, holding that folder full of numbers no one cared about anymore, I realized something important. Dan thought he'd taken everything from me, but he didn't know. The company wasn't the only thing my dad left me. I still had one thing, something Dan had completely overlooked, and it was about to become his biggest mistake. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there on my living room floor surrounded by old files, invoices, and dusty boxes I'd taken home over the years. You know that weird silence after everything collapses, when even your own thoughts sound loud. That was my entire apartment. My mom didn't call. Not that night, not the next day. I guess she thought if she ignored it long enough, it'd just stop being awkward. But I couldn't stop replaying that moment. The way Dan looked at me, the way Jake smiled, the way no one said a damn thing. Truth is, I wanted to scream. But instead, I started remembering. Flashbacks of every little thing I'd done for that company and every warning sign I'd ignored. Like the time Dan forgot to add my name on the annual report. Or when he replaced our old logo with one that had his initials subtly woven into the design. I thought it was a coincidence. It wasn't. This was planned. Every detail, every move. He'd been setting me up for this the entire time. I went back to the office 2 days later, mostly because I couldn't let go yet. My keycard still worked, which was a small miracle. When I stepped in, the air felt different. My nameplate was gone from the door. Jake's was there instead. He was sitting in my chair, laughing on a phone call, feet on my old desk. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. "Oh, hey," he said, waving casually. "Didn't expect you to stop by." I swallowed hard. "Just picking up the rest of my things." He nodded. Cool. Try not to mess up the system folders. I'm reorganizing everything." That smug little tone. I'll never forget it. I turned, walked into the file room, and took a long breath. Part of me wanted to burn the place down. But then something caught my eye. An old binder tucked behind the server cabinet. It was my dad's original ledger. Handwritten notes, project details, client lists, even personal memos. He used to keep it in a safe at home, but after he passed, I moved it to the office for safekeeping. Dan never even knew it existed. I opened it and flipped through the pages, and that's when it hit me. Dad had detailed ownership breakdowns. He'd left a 51% controlling interest to me, legally transferred through a clause in his old partnership contract. It wasn't just sentimental. It was power, actual legal power. My heart started racing. All these years, I'd assumed the merger Dan proposed meant I'd signed away majority ownership. But reading those notes, I realized he'd only merged part of the assets, not the core ownership. Meaning technically, I was still the majority stakeholder. And that's when everything inside me changed. I wasn't powerless, not yet. I just needed to confirm it. So I called my dad's old attorney, a quiet, gray-haired man named Mr. Jacobs who'd always treated me like family. When I told him what happened, there was this long pause on the phone before he said, "You might want to come by my office tomorrow, sweetheart. I think we need to look at some old papers." That night, I sat up thinking about everything. The years of manipulation, the family dinners where Dan made little jokes about teaching me how real business works, the way my mom laughed at them, not realizing what was happening. You know that slow kind of betrayal, the kind that doesn't stab you but erodes you, one small insult at a time? That's what he'd done to me. And now I could see it clear as day. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Jacobs' office with a coffee in hand and my dad's ledger clutched like it was the Bible. He pulled out a dusty box labeled Foster Logistics Holdings, flipped through the old files, and smiled. "You're in luck," he said. "Your father was meticulous. He never revoked this clause." He slid the document toward me. I stared at it, heart pounding. It was real. I still owned controlling interest. "So, what does that mean?" I asked. He leaned back. "It means, legally speaking, your stepfather can't fire you from a company you control. And if he's been using assets or funds without authorization?" He trailed off, giving me that look lawyers give right before saying something big. "Then you might have grounds for more than just reinstatement." My breath caught. I mean, he said gently, "if you play this right, you could take everything back." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All that pain, all that humiliation. And suddenly, I had a card to play. A very strong one. I left his office with the folder in my hands, walked straight to my car, and sat there for 10 minutes in silence. You ever feel a storm brewing inside you? But this time, you're not afraid of it. That's exactly how it felt. For the first time since that awful day, I wasn't broken. I was planning. I didn't tell anyone, not even Mom. I just started observing, watching. Every time Dan bragged about a new deal, I'd take note. Every time Jake posted about his team's success on LinkedIn, I'd screenshot it. Because here's the thing, I didn't want revenge yet. I wanted information. And I was patient. Very patient. And that patience? It was about to pay off in ways none of them could imagine. Because 2 weeks later, I found something buried in the financial logs that made my blood run cold, and at the same time gave me exactly the leverage I needed. 2 weeks later, I walked into that office again. Not as an employee, not as someone begging for her job back, but as someone who knew something they didn't. I had spent every night combing through the internal records I still had access to from my company laptop. Yeah, Dan forgot to revoke my admin credentials. That was his first mistake. What I found, it wasn't just sloppy accounting, it was theft. Hidden payments, fake consulting fees, and marketing expenses that led to one place, Dan's private account. He'd been draining company funds for years, and Jake had been helping him cover it up. I remember staring at the screen, my heart pounding, whispering, "You have no idea who you just fired." Truth is, I could have gone to the police right then. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted them to feel what I felt, that mix of shock, betrayal, and humiliation. I wanted them to lose everything the way they'd made me lose everything. So I waited for the perfect opportunity, and it came faster than I thought. Dan had announced a company-wide meeting to celebrate new leadership. Jake was officially being introduced as the operations director, my title. I showed up uninvited. The whole office went quiet when I walked in. Dan's face froze, Jake smirked, and I could practically feel the tension crawling up the walls. "Didn't expect to see you here, Emily," Dan said, voice dripping with fake politeness. "Neither did I said, holding my folder close. "But I figured I should witness history, watch my replacement in action." People chuckled awkwardly. Jake puffed his chest. "Hey, no hard feelings, right?" I smiled. "Oh, none at all. I just wanted to make sure you got your facts straight before you start signing contracts under the wrong name." His smile faded. "What?" I stepped closer, slid the folder onto the conference table, and opened it slowly. "You see this? It's my father's original ownership agreement. Legally filed, dated, signed. I still own 51% of Foster Logistics. Which means, this little show of yours?" I gestured toward the projector screen where Jake's face was plastered under the words, "New Operations Director." "It's not official. In fact, it's void." The room went silent. You could hear someone's pen drop. Dan's face turned red. "That's impossible," he barked. "We merged everything." "No, Dan," I said calmly. "You merged assets. You never changed the ownership clause. You should have read the fine print before firing the majority owner." I swear, I could see the exact moment it hit him, that split second of realization that everything he thought he controlled was slipping away. Jake tried to laugh it off, muttering something about lawyers, but I wasn't finished. I slid another paper forward, printouts of the financial transactions I'd uncovered. "Oh, and while we're at it," I said, my tone colder now, "you might want to explain these." Dan's eyes darted across the pages. He recognized them. "These are private. No, they're company funds." I cut him off. "Transferred illegally into your personal accounts. So either you start talking, or I start calling people." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I could feel every pair of eyes in that room locked on him. The man who used to strut around like he owned the world now looked like a cornered animal. He stood, slammed his hands on the table, and stormed out. Jake followed, mumbling something about a misunderstanding. I just stood there, breathing steady, watching the empire they built on lies start to crumble. My coworkers didn't know what to say. Some were stunned, some whispered, "Holy crap," and one even gave me this tiny, proud nod. I walked out of that room with my head high for the first time in months. But the story wasn't over, because while Dan was busy scrambling to cover his tracks, I was already 3 steps ahead. I met with Mr. Jacobs again that same afternoon. He reviewed everything, the documents, the financial evidence, and his eyebrows shot up. "This is bad," he said. "For him, not for you. You could legally reclaim full control if you file now." I leaned back in my chair, thinking, "No, not yet. I want him to feel it first." Mr. Jacobs looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to be impressed or worried. But he didn't argue. Over the next few days, rumors started spreading. Clients began asking questions. A few even called me directly. Apparently, they'd worked with my dad for years and didn't trust Dan's new leadership. I didn't badmouth anyone. I didn't have to. The truth was already out there. It just needed time to spread. And oh, did it spread. Within a week, 3 major clients froze their contracts. 2 employees resigned and joined me privately for coffee, quietly asking if I planned to start something new. I didn't answer right away, but I smiled, because I already knew the answer. Meanwhile, Dan tried everything: phone calls, damage control, even a pathetic family dinner invitation. When I showed up, Mom looked tired, like she'd aged 10 years since all this started. She poured me coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Emily, can't we just fix this?" she whispered. Dan sat across the table, fake smile plastered on. "We all made mistakes," he said smoothly. "Why don't you come back, help Jake transition properly? It'll be good for the family." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who called me sweetheart while plotting to erase me. And I said quietly, "You fired me, remember? You made your choice." Then I slid a folded document across the table. His eyes narrowed as he unfolded it. His face drained of color when he saw the legal notice, official, signed, time-stamped. "Effective immediately," I said softly. "You're suspended pending investigation into financial misconduct. You'll be hearing from my attorney." The fork in his hand clattered against the plate. Mom gasped, whispering my name. But I just stood up, grabbed my purse, and said, "You should have thought about family before you betrayed it." And as I walked away, I swear I heard Jake mutter under his breath, "What the hell did she just do?" But the real question was, what was I about to do next? Because I wasn't done yet, not even close. After that dinner, things started moving fast. Dan must have realized how serious it was, because 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment, suit jacket half-buttoned, fake confidence glued to his face. "Emily, let's talk," he said, standing in my doorway like we were still family. I crossed my arms. "You have 10 minutes. He tried to charm his way through it, talking about misunderstandings, how he'd meant well, how Jake was just eager to learn. Truth is, hearing him twist the story like that made my blood boil. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. I just smiled politely and said, "You should probably talk to your lawyer instead." Then I closed the door in his face. That's when I knew I had the upper hand, and I wasn't letting go. Over the next week, I worked with Mr. Jacobs to prepare every legal document we needed. The ownership transfer forms, the evidence of misused funds, the proof of fake invoices, all lined up perfectly. But instead of rushing it, I waited, because timing was everything. The annual industry trade show was coming up, the biggest event of the year, where all our competitors, partners, and clients gathered. Foster Logistics had a booth every year, and Dan loved that spotlight more than anything. That's where I planned to end this. The morning of the event, I showed up early wearing my dad's old watch and a calmness I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't there as the fired daughter. I was there as the rightful owner. The air inside the convention center buzzed with chatter. Salespeople greeting clients, cameras flashing, music playing from the main stage. And there he was, standing under a giant banner that read, "Foster Logistics, a new era," shaking hands, pretending everything was fine. Jake was beside him, handing out brochures like a kid playing business. I watched for a while, unseen in the crowd, until the company's biggest client, a man named Robert Klein, walked in. I knew Robert. He'd been one of my dad's first contracts. I walked straight toward him. His eyes widened when he recognized me. "Emily? What on earth?" "Hi, Robert," I said, smiling. "Mind if I borrow 2 minutes of your time before you talk to Dan?" He nodded, curious. I handed him a neatly bound document, the official notice of leadership suspension and ownership proof, already filed with the business registry that morning. "Long story short," I said, lowering my voice, "you might want to reconsider who you're signing with today." He flipped through the pages, his brows furrowed. "This is serious." "It is," I said softly, "and I'm making it right." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Your father would be proud." I thanked him and walked straight to the main floor. The timing couldn't have been better. Dan was just stepping onto the stage to give his big speech. The microphone squealed slightly as he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to introduce—" I took a deep breath and stepped up beside him. The crowd murmured. Dan froze mid-sentence. "Emily," he hissed, trying to smile. "Now's not the time." "Actually," I said calmly, taking the microphone from his hand, "it's the perfect time." The room went silent. Every camera, every phone turned toward us. For those who don't know me, I continued, voice steady, I'm Emily Foster, majority owner of Foster Logistics. And as of this morning, I've officially reinstated control of this company. Mr. Dan Richards has been suspended pending investigation for financial misconduct. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Dan's face went pale. "You can't do this here," he stammered. "This is slander." I turned to him, smiled, and said quietly enough for the mic to catch, "No, Dan. This is justice." The crowd erupted. Reporters, cameras, clients whispering. Jake looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I walked off stage, calm and unshaken, while Dan shouted something about false accusations. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and every client in that room had just watched his empire collapse in real time. Outside the venue, my phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from employees, clients, even news outlets wanting a statement. I didn't answer any of them. I just stood there on the sidewalk, breathing in the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in years. That night, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was small, broken. "Emily, what have you done?" she asked. I closed my eyes. "I fixed what he broke, Mom." There was silence on the line. Then she whispered, "He's packing his things." "He's leaving." I didn't say a word. I just let her sit with it, because truth is, I still loved her. But I couldn't save her from the choices she made. The next morning, I walked into the office again, this time with my name back on the door. The employees stood when I entered. Some clapped quietly. Others just smiled. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was peace. But the story didn't quite end there. A few days later, Jake showed up. He looked nervous, holding a small box of his things. I wanted to say sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know half the stuff he was doing." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" he nodded. "I was just following orders. I didn't mean to take your job." I studied him for a long moment. "You took it because you could," I said softly. "Now you're here because you have nowhere else to go." He looked down, ashamed. "You gonna fire me too?" I thought about it for a second, then shook my head. "No, I'm gonna make you work for me. And you're gonna learn how to earn something instead of inheriting it." He blinked, surprised. "Seriously?" "Seriously," I said. "But one mistake, and you're out." He nodded quickly. "You won't regret it. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But that's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't loud. It's quiet. It's when they have to live with what they've done and see you rise anyway." And as I sat in my father's old chair that evening, the city lights glowing through the window, I whispered to myself, "We did it, Dad. It's ours again." The days that followed were strange, peaceful but heavy, like standing in the quiet after a long storm. The office was calm now. No shouting, no manipulation, no fake smiles. Just work, honest, steady work. Every morning, I'd unlock my dad's old office, sit down at his desk, and breathe for a second before starting the day. It still smelled faintly like cedar and ink, the way it did when I was a kid sitting beside him, watching him balance ledgers by hand. For the first time since he died, that room didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. Clients started coming back. One by one, they reached out, not because of contracts or profit, but because they trusted me. "You remind me of your father," one of them said over the phone, and that single line almost broke me. I didn't cry in front of anyone, but when I got home that night, I sat on the floor and let it all out. Not just relief, grief, anger, everything I'd been carrying for years. I wasn't just rebuilding a business. I was reclaiming a part of myself. Dan, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Turns out, when you steal from your own company, people stop answering your calls. The investigation uncovered everything. The fake invoices, the missing funds, even the offshore account he thought no one knew about. He lost his licenses, his reputation, and most of his so-called friends. The last I heard, he'd left town quietly, probably trying to start over somewhere. No one knew his name. As for my mom, that's harder to talk about. She tried reaching out a few times, but I wasn't ready. Part of me still loved her, but another part couldn't forget how easily she'd stayed silent when I needed her most. Silence can be its own kind of betrayal. One evening, weeks later, she showed up at the office. I looked up from my desk, and there she was, standing in the doorway, smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never seen. "You look just like him when you sit there," she said softly. I didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, holding a little photo frame. "He'd be proud of you." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. I should have stopped him." I stared at her for a long moment. "You chose him, Mom." Tears filled her eyes. "I know, and I'll live with that." She set the photo frame down. It was an old picture of the three of us before everything fell apart. Then she turned to leave. I didn't stop her, but I whispered, "Mom, don't disappear this time." She froze in the doorway, nodded once, and walked away. That night, I left the office late. The city was quiet, the streetlights glowing like they were whispering old secrets. I took a walk down to the little diner my dad and I used to go to. The waitress still recognized me. "Coffee, black, just like your dad," she said with a smile. I sat there for an hour, sipping slowly, watching the reflections of passing cars in the window. I realized something then. Revenge had gotten me here, but it wasn't what kept me going. It was justice, yes, but also legacy, continuation. I didn't just take back what was stolen. I rebuilt it into something stronger. The next morning, Jake came into my office, early before anyone else. He had a folder in his hand and a nervous look on his face. "Hey, I finished the client analysis," he said. "Took your notes and added projections for next quarter." I opened the folder, flipped through it, then looked up. "Good work," I said simply. He smiled, genuinely this time. Not cocky, not fake, just grateful. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I'm learning a lot." "You should," I said. "Because one day, when you've actually earned something, you'll understand why I fought for this." He nodded, and for a second, I saw a glimpse of hope. Maybe he'd be different after all. Maybe that was the real victory. Not destroying them, but changing what came after. Later that week, we held our first company meeting under the new leadership. I stood in front of everyone, people who'd seen the worst and stayed anyway, and I told them the truth. No speeches, no drama, just the truth. This company was built on trust, and somewhere along the line that got lost, I said. But we're bringing it back, together. No more lies. No more fear. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. And that was enough. When the day ended, I sat alone in my office again, the city lights flickering outside. I picked up my dad's old watch from the desk, the one I'd worn to the trade show. It ticked softly, steady and sure, like it always had. I whispered, "We made it, Dad." Then my phone buzzed, an email from a major investor offering to expand our operations nationwide. I smiled, full circle. Before shutting off the lights, I looked out the window one last time and said quietly, "Funny thing about revenge. People think it's about getting even. But really, it's about rising so high they can't reach you anymore." I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked out, finally free.